Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to the Lawless Lawyer, upholder and justice, eliminating the oppression. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for still supporting us, and because we got a lot of requests to make another session, so here we are making another sessions with another interesting topic to be discussed. So firstly, let me tell you our topic for today. We are going to explain and share about promissory estoppel based on the situation given. So, without further ado, let me again introduce our panels for today. We have Ms. Sofia Adila and also Datu Nurujana Izzati. So, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you guys are doing well. As I mentioned earlier, that we are going to discuss our topic for today, which is promissory estoppel based on the situation. So let us look at the situation first. Yeah. Summary of the facts. PKNS had entered into a contract with Super Fast Engineers Berhad for the constructions of 500 small tourist chalets at several beaches in Malaysia. As stated in the contract, the houses were to be ready on 1st September 2007. However, there are some difficulties, which are difficult to obtain materials like iron, wood, cements, and the shortage of the labor as it was not possible to construct the houses within the stipulated time. Therefore, the engineering company approached PKNS in February 2006 to discuss the difficulties. Thereupon, PKNS promised to supply all the necessary materials and did so supply for few months. Then the PKNS abruptly stopped supplying the materials without informing or giving some cautions to Superfast engineers. On 15 January 2008, the PKNS filed a suit against Superfast engineers Berhad, claiming the damages of delay as the chalet supposed to be done in 1st September 2007. I think the situation was a bit complicated, I guess. So, can one of you tell us the legal issue raised in the situation?
Ms. Nisa, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I am honored to be a part of your show. I hope the audience won't get sick of seeing me again. Now, anyways, back to the questions. Where were we, anyways? The legal issue. The legal issue arises is whether the promissory estoppel can be the defense to the promisor in the judgment. Thank you, Ms. Nisa. Speaking of the doctrines of promissory estoppels, what are the principles? Doctrine of promissory estoppel is also known as quasi-estoppel. It is flexible doctrine where the courts will seek the justice to the contracting parties. Now, the promissory estoppel is enforceable when the promisor made a significant promise which caused the promisee to act and rely upon it. And if the promisee suffered detrimental by relying on the promise which the promisor had failed to fulfill his promise at the beginning of the relationship, the promisee is entitled to claim such waiver. Remember that? Now, in the case of the high trees, which would affirm the concept of promissory estoppel, the facts of the case is when in 1937, the plaintiff leased a block of flats to the defendant with a sum of £2,500. Due to the outbreak of the war, the defendant had difficulties in getting tenants for all the flats. So plaintiff decided to reduce the rent to half, which is 1,250 during the war year. And when the war ended in 1945, the plaintiff claimed for full original rent. So the court held that the reduction of the rent was meant to be only temporary because of the war year. In 1940, plaintiff was entitled for full payment when the war ended. In 1945, plaintiff could not claim full payment during the war years, which in between 1940, because the plaintiff would have been stopped from going back on his promise.
So thank you very much, Miss Sophia, for the answers. So I would like to clarify that she also mentioned the doctrine of Promissory Estoppel based on the case of high trees. So before we proceed with Datuk Jana, let me explain the scope of Promissory Estoppel, or it can be simplified as how far Promissory Estoppel can be used or can be applied. So, in the case of Boston Trading 1985 Senden Berhad against Arab Malaysians Merchants Bank Berhad, the Federal Court stated the time has come for the court to recognize that the doctrine of estoppel is a flexible principle by which justice is done according to the circumstances of the case. It is a doctrine of wide utility and has been resorted to in varying facts patterns to achieve justice. Indeed, the circumstances in which the doctrine may be operated are endless. So here, the scope of promissory estoppel basically is a wide utility. So there is no scope to use promissory estoppel. However, in the case of Tool Metal Manufacturing Corporation Limited against Tungsten Electric Corporation Limited, it had been stated when one party took the contract in the absence of fresh considerations, agrees not to enforce his right, and equity will be raised in favor of the other party. However, there are three conditions, which are: firstly, the other party has changed his position. Secondly, the promisor can retract his promise and giving reasonable and adequate notice. Thirdly, the promise becomes final and irrevocable if the promise cannot resume his original position. Okay, so I found a case which is, I think it have nearly same with the fact is nearly same with our situation, which is a case of Sim Seok Ang against government of Malaysia. Okay, the facts of the case is the appellant had entered into a contract to build certain buildings for the government. In the course of constructions, the government agreed to supply building materials to the appellant as the appellant had found difficulty in getting them. Subsequently, the government stopped supplying the materials and required the appellant to assume responsibility of getting them by himself without giving adequate notice to him. As the result, the appellant failed to complete the building on time and the government sued him. Okay, so the former federal court held that the appellant had relied on the government's promise and assurance to supply building materials. To require the appellant to resume his contractual obligation, the government must give reasonable and adequate notice. Besides, in deciding whether the notice was reasonable and adequate, the surrounding circumstances would have to be considered. Then, the court found that the notice given by the government was not reasonable to enable the appellant to look for his own supply. Therefore, the appellant was not in breach of duty, in breach of contracts. So I think it's very similar with our situation, and as the PKNS also stop supply the materials after they had promised to supervise engineers to supply the materials. And I think it is very unfair for PKNS to sue the SFE as they will not get any notice from the PKNS. So I think we should take a break and we will continue after this.
지금부터 시작해봐 앞을 달려 Running running 세상에 소리쳐 막다른 길이 나타나도 난 괜찮아.
So welcome back to the Lawless Lawyer. So now, without further ado, let us complete our discussion today with the second panel, which is Dr. Jana. I think she can't wait to answer my questions. So here is my questions. As we know, there are few features of promissory estoppel. Therefore, can you explain to us any of the features suit with the situation given?
Thank you, Nisa, for the question, and of course, I cannot wait to answer the question that you have been asked. So now let's discuss about the features of the promissory estoppel that we can apply in this case. Okay, so the first features of promissory estoppel is it must not be unfair for the promisor to go back on his promise and insist on his strict legal rights. So as in the case of MAA Holdings, Sdn Bhd and Eng Siu Wah, so the plaintiff already paid 2 million to the defendant to purchase a share. So in the agreement that they made, state that the plaintiff need an approval from the Foreign Investment Committee, FIC, and without the approval, it will not affect the sale. Then the plaintiff already made full payment for the share, but the defendant refused to hand over on the ground of no approval from FIC. So the held by the court is that the defendant already accepted the payment and wait 38 days before the FIC's approval had been obtained. This promissory estoppel is not applied for this case, as it is unfair and unjust for the defendant to insist a strict legal rights, as plaintiff has done their duty in the contract, which is make a payment for the share. Okay, so the second features of promissory estoppel that we also can refer is it is about the Promisors Act had influenced the promise. So as in case of posted trading and Arab Nation Merchant Bank Berhad, so the federal court state that it is not an essential ingredient in requiring a proof before the doctrine may be invoked. And also we have to look at the particular circumstances of the case, that it would be unjust to allow the promisor to insist his legal right. Moreover, we also need to look at the conduct of the litigant, which may give rise to estoppel also. Hence, it may need to show that the litigant had altered his position, although such alteration need to be to his detriment. So the conclusion, the plaintiff, which is PKNS, cannot sue the defendant because of the delay of the Charlottes that supposedly be done by the 1st September 2007. It is because the PKNS do not inform nor give any caution to them by notice in the sudden stop supplying the necessary materials as they already promised before. And it will also create unjust to the defendant side.
So thank you very much, Datu Jana, for the answers. She also conclude our discussion today. So by that, we have to end our discussion now. So I hope all of you get some input from our discussion. And thank you so much for spending your times, and thank you for your support. I hope we can make another session in the future, inshallah. So that's all from us. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.